Seth Rollins just delivered the most emotionally devastating promo in WWE history after being brutally betrayed by Paul Heyman at Crown Jewel, and if you're not absolutely heartbroken by the Visionary's raw vulnerability while calling out everyone who has ever stabbed him in the back, you clearly don't understand the psychological torture this man has endured throughout his entire career. What we witnessed wasn't just a wrestling promo, it was the complete emotional breakdown of someone who has been systematically betrayed by every single person he's ever trusted, and Paul Heyman's shocking alliance with Brock Lesnar was the final dagger that shattered whatever faith Seth had left in human loyalty. The sight of Seth Rollins standing alone in the center of the ring on Raw with tears of genuine rage streaming down his face while screaming, "They're all traitors," will be remembered as one of the most powerful and authentic moments of vulnerability ever captured in professional wrestling. This wasn't the confident visionary character, this was Paul Levesque, the human being completely exposed and broken by a lifetime of betrayals that have destroyed his ability to trust anyone. Paul Heyman looked me in the eye and promised me loyalty, and then he joined Brock Lesnar, the man who's tried to end my career multiple times. Everyone I've ever trusted has betrayed me, and I'm done pretending it doesn't destroy me. Those weren't just scripted wrestling words, they were the anguished screams of someone whose entire support system has systematically collapsed through repeated betrayals that would break most people. The raw pain in his voice made even his harshest critics feel genuine sympathy. You want to talk about promos that fundamentally expose the human cost of wrestling storylines? Seth Rollins didn't just react to Paul Heyman's betrayal, he delivered a comprehensive breakdown of every single betrayal he suffered throughout his career, connecting them into a narrative of systematic psychological torture that reveals him as possibly the most betrayed wrestler in WWE history. The promo started with Seth pacing the ring like a caged animal, microphone clutched so tightly his knuckles were white, trying desperately to find words adequate to express the magnitude of what Paul Heyman had done. "I brought Paul into my circle. I trusted him to have my back against Brock Lesnar. And at Crown Jewel, when I needed him most, he handed Brock a steel chair and smiled while I got destroyed." But here's what makes this reaction absolutely devastating and different from typical betrayal promos. Seth didn't just focus on Heyman's recent actions. He systematically went through every major betrayal of his career, showing how this latest backstabbing was just the most recent chapter in a lifetime of people using and discarding him when it became convenient. The most heartbreaking moment came when Seth started with the Shield's breakup. "I was called the betrayer, the sellout, the backstabber for breaking up the Shield, but where are Roman and Dean now? Roman built an empire on family loyalty and then abandoned WWE when it suited him. Dean left for AEW and trash-talked this company for years. But somehow I'm the traitor? I'm the one who never left, who stayed through injuries and struggles, and my reward is being betrayed by everyone I trust." Here's a question that's going to reveal how complex Seth's character has become. Did you notice how he reframed his Shield betrayal as actually being the most loyal act, since he's the only one who never abandoned WWE despite being vilified? The actual progression through his career betrayals was systematic and devastating. Seth went through each major alliance and showed how every single one ended in betrayal or abandonment. "I trusted Kevin Owens and he turned on me. I believed in Murphy and he left. I brought Edge back and he tried to end my career. And now Paul Heyman, the man who I thought finally understood loyalty, joins the very man who spent years trying to destroy me." But the most powerful aspect of this promo was how Seth connected these betrayals to his own actions, showing genuine self-awareness about how his Shield betrayal created a pattern that keeps repeating. "Maybe I deserve this. Maybe breaking up the Shield cursed me to never have real allies again. Maybe karma has decided that the betrayer must spend his entire career being betrayed. But that doesn't make the pain any less real." The vulnerability and willingness to accept potential responsibility for his own suffering elevated this beyond typical victim promos. Seth wasn't just blaming others, he was genuinely questioning whether his own past actions had created this cycle of betrayal that now defines his career. Quick question for the karma and consequences experts: do you think Seth's repeated betrayals are cosmic justice for breaking up the Shield, or is he being unfairly punished for one mistake he made years ago? The most infuriating revelation came when Seth explained exactly how Paul Heyman had manipulated him. "Paul spent months gaining my trust. He told me stories about his history with Brock, made me believe he was tired of being used and wanted to work with someone who valued loyalty. And I believed him because I'm apparently the biggest fool in WWE history." The investigation into Heyman's long-term manipulation reveals it was even more calculated than Seth realized. Sources suggest Paul had been planning to rejoin Brock for weeks while simultaneously convincing Seth he was committed to their alliance. The level of deception and premeditation makes the betrayal exponentially worse. But perhaps the most devastating moment came when Seth broke down while discussing how this affects his personal life and relationships. "How am I supposed to go home and trust my wife? How do I have genuine friendships when everyone in this business has proven they'll stab me in the back the moment it benefits them?" Paul Heyman didn't just betray me as a wrestler, he destroyed whatever faith I had left in human decency. The raw honesty about how professional betrayals bleed into personal relationships and affect mental health was unprecedented for WWE programming. Seth was essentially admitting that the constant betrayals have created trust issues that extend far beyond wrestling into his actual life. Here's another question about boundaries between character and reality. When wrestlers expose genuine psychological damage from storylines, does that create more compelling television or cross into territory that's uncomfortable and potentially harmful? The most shocking aspect of Seth's promo was when he called out the entire WWE roster for enabling his betrayers. Where were all of you when Dean was trashing this company? Where was the loyalty to WWE that everyone claims to value? But when I break up a faction to pursue my individual success, I'm the worst person alive? The hypocrisy is suffocating. The accusation that the entire locker room holds Seth to different standards than other wrestlers exposes real tensions about favoritism and selective moral judgment. Seth was essentially arguing that he's been unfairly demonized for actions that others commit without facing similar consequences. But the most powerful sequence came when Seth specifically addressed Roman Reigns despite him not being present. Roman, you built the bloodline on family loyalty and blood bonds, and then you abandoned WWE when your ego got bruised. You left your family, your company, your responsibilities, but somehow you're still the hero and I'm still the villain? How does that work? The comparison between Seth's loyalty to WWE despite constant betrayals versus Roman's abandonment when things got difficult created a fascinating moral inversion. Seth was reframing the narrative to position himself as the truly loyal one who has endured psychological torture for his commitment. The fan reaction to Seth's promo has been absolutely overwhelming, with social media erupting in support and sympathy. Wrestling fans worldwide are expressing genuine emotional investment in Seth's pain and anger at the system that has repeatedly betrayed him. The authenticity created unprecedented connection. Here's a question about emotional investment. Does Seth's vulnerable honesty about betrayal trauma make you more invested in his character, or does it make wrestling feel too heavy and serious? The most controversial aspect of this promo is whether WWE should be glorifying or exposing the psychological damage that betrayal storylines inflict. Seth essentially admitted that years of being betrayed on television has affected his real mental health and ability to trust, which raises ethical questions about entertainment versus harm. The testimonies from psychologists who analyzed the promo reveal genuine concern about the mental health implications. Seth described classic symptoms of betrayal trauma and trust disorders, one expert noted. Whether this is character work or genuine psychological impact, presenting it as entertainment raises serious questions about the responsibility of wrestling companies to protect performers' mental health. But perhaps the most important revelation came when Seth addressed Paul Heyman directly despite him not being in the arena. Paul, you're 59 years old and you've spent your entire career manipulating and betraying people. Does it ever keep you up at night? Do you ever feel genuine remorse for the psychological damage you've inflicted on everyone who trusted you? Or are we all just pawns in your endless game? The personal nature of attacking not just Heyman's actions but his moral character and conscience elevated this beyond typical wrestling heat. Seth was essentially calling Paul a sociopath who lacks the ability to feel empathy or guilt. The investigation into how Paul Heyman responded to these accusations reveals he's been completely silent. Instead of his usual verbose explanations, Heyman has apparently refused to comment on Seth's promo, which some interpret as guilt and others view as strategic avoidance. Here's a question for the moral philosophy experts. Does Paul Heyman's lifetime of betrayals make him a brilliant strategist playing a character, or does it reveal genuine character flaws that transcend entertainment? The most shocking theory is that Seth's promo was entirely unscripted and represented genuine emotions breaking through the typical wrestling format. Sources suggest WWE officials were surprised by the intensity and personal nature of his comments, leading to speculation that Seth went off script to express real frustrations. The investigation into whether this was planned or spontaneous reveals conflicting information. Some insiders claim Seth had approval to be more vulnerable than usual, while others suggest his emotional breakdown exceeded what creative had planned and WWE chose to air it because it was so compelling. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how this promo recontextualizes Seth's entire career. By systematically showing how every alliance ended in betrayal, Seth has created a narrative where he's not the villain but rather the victim of a cruel system that punishes loyalty and rewards betrayal. The comparison to other famous "everyone betrayed me" promos throughout wrestling history is inevitable, but Seth stands out for its comprehensive nature and genuine vulnerability. While others have focused on recent betrayals, Seth created a career-spanning narrative of systematic psychological abuse. Here's a question for the wrestling historians: where does Seth Rollins' "They're all traitors" promo rank among the most emotionally powerful and authentic moments in WWE history? The most important consideration is what this means for Seth's character going forward. Has he permanently abandoned trying to form alliances and trust others, or will this lead to another cycle where someone eventually earns his trust only to inevitably betray him again? The testimonies from wrestlers who watched the promo backstage reveal it created genuine emotional responses. Everyone watching felt Seth's pain, one performer revealed. Even people who've had their own issues with Seth couldn't help but sympathize with someone who has been betrayed that many times. But the most terrifying implication is that Seth might be right. Maybe loyalty is impossible in wrestling and everyone eventually betrays everyone else. If his cynical worldview is actually accurate, it suggests wrestling creates a toxic environment where trust is systematically punished. The investigation into the psychological impact of repeated betrayal storylines on performers reveals concerning patterns. Multiple wrestlers have reported that constantly portraying betrayals affects their real-life ability to trust, suggesting that the line between character and reality becomes dangerously blurred. Here's a question about the psychological cost of entertainment. Should wrestling companies be more cautious about storylines involving repeated betrayals given the potential impact on performers' mental health? The most shocking development is that several wrestlers have reportedly approached Seth to form alliances after his promo. The vulnerability he showed apparently resonated with performers who also feel isolated and betrayed, creating potential for new alliances built on shared trauma. But the most important question is whether Seth will be able to trust again, or if Paul Heyman's betrayal was the final straw that permanently broke his ability to form genuine partnerships. The answer will determine whether Seth spends the rest of his career as a lone wolf or eventually takes another risk on human connection. The coming weeks will reveal whether WWE capitalizes on the genuine emotion Seth exposed, or whether they return to typical wrestling storylines that ignore the depth he brought to this situation. Either way, this promo has fundamentally changed how fans view Seth Rollins and his lifetime of betrayals. Here's a final question for the entire WWE Universe. After hearing Seth Rollins systematically break down every betrayal he suffered, including Paul Heyman joining Brock Lesnar, do you view him as a tragic figure deserving sympathy, or as someone whose own past betrayals created this karmic cycle? The wrestling world is emotionally devastated by Seth Rollins' raw vulnerability and his comprehensive breakdown of how everyone he's ever trusted has betrayed him. Paul Heyman's shocking alliance with Brock Lesnar wasn't just another wrestling angle, it was the final betrayal that broke Seth's spirit and exposed the psychological torture of building a career in an industry where loyalty seems impossible. They're all traitors in Seth's eyes, and after hearing his pain, it's hard to argue he's wrong. Seth Rollins didn't just react to Paul Heyman's betrayal, he delivered a manifesto about the impossibility of trust in professional wrestling that will resonate with anyone who has ever been betrayed by someone they loved. The visionary has become the victim, and his anguished cry of "they're all traitors" represents not just his personal pain but the universal experience of anyone who has ever had their faith in humanity shattered by those closest to them.